Welcome to Well Read and Read, the Banned Black Books event, hosted by Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. And the interesting thing about banning books, that's a problem from the past, from way back in the past. But the interesting thing to me, I always say is, it's one thing if you don't want your child to read it. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But how can you dictate what my child reads, what I want my child to read? And so I think we have, other issues that we need to really work on in relation to, whose rights are appropriate rights or effective rights or important rights. So what I want to do is I'm going to start, I'm reading from a book by Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks has always been one of my favorite people. It's called Black Looks, Race and Representation, and it's something that I have read several times. And she has a chapter, it's called Loving Blackness as Political Resistance. Black folks often seek the promise of mainstream success, but it's only available if we are willing to negotiate the value of blackness. Contrary to James Cone's hope that whites would divest of racism and be born again in the spirit of empathy and unity with black folks, we are collectively asked to show our solidarity with the white supremacist status quo by overvaluing whiteness, by seeing blackness solely as a marker of powerlessness and victimization. To the degree that black folks embody by our actions and behavior familiar racist stereotypes, we will find greater support and affirmation in the culture. A prime example of this is white consumer support, particularly of misogynistic rap, which reproduces the idea that black males are violent, and it's violent. Okay. Despite the civil rights struggle, the 1960s Black Power movement, and the power of slogans like Black is Beautiful, masses of black people continue to be socialized via mass media and non-progressive educational systems that internalize various white supremacist thoughts and values. Without ongoing resistance, struggle, and progression, black liberation movements for self-determination, masses of black people and everyone else have no alternative worldview. Specifically, as it affirms and celebrates blackness, rituals of affirmation celebrating black history and holidays do not intervene against white supremacist socialization. They exist apart from active anti-racist struggle that seeks to transform society. As long as black folks are taught that the only way we can gain any degree of economic self-sufficiency or be maternally privileged is by first rejecting blackness, our history and culture, then there will always be a crisis of black identity. Internalized racism will continue to erode collective struggle for self-determination. Masses of black children will continue to suffer from low self-esteem. A culture of domination demands of all its citizens self-negation. The more marginalized, the more intense the demand. Since black people, especially the underclass, are bombarded by messages that we have no value and we are worthless, it is no wonder that we fall prey to nihilistic despair or forms of addiction. Collectively, black people and our allies in struggle are empowered when we practice self-love as a revolutionary intervention that undermines practices of domination. Loving blackness as a political resistance transforms our ways of looking and being, and thus creates the conditions necessary for us to move against the forces of domination and death, and to ultimately reclaim black life.
I guess it's not a secret why I picked Nicole's book. It's a good book. My dad always flew an American flag in our front yard. The blue paint on our two-story house was sometimes chipped. The fence or the rail by the stairs or the front door might occasionally fall into disrepair, but the flag always flew pristine. Our corner lot, which had been redlined by the federal government, was along the river that divided the black side from the white side of our town. At the edge of our lawn, on an aluminum pole, soared the flag, which my dad would replace with a new one as soon as it showed the slightest tatter. My dad was born into a family of sharecroppers on the white plantation in Greenwood, Mississippi, where black people bent over cotton from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, just as their enslaved ancestors had done long before. The Mississippi of my dad's youth was an apartheid state that subjugated its black residents, almost half of the population, through breathtaking acts of violence. White residents in Mississippi lynched more black people than those in any other state in the country. And the white people in my dad's home county lynched more black residents than those in any other county in Mississippi for such crimes as entering a room occupied by white women, bumping into a white girl, or trying to start a sharecroppers union. My dad's mother, like all the black people in Greenwood, could not vote, use the public library, or find work on other than toiling in cotton fields or toiling in white people's houses. In the 1940s, she packed up her few belongings and her 3 small children and joined the flood of black Southerners fleeing to the north. She got off the Illinois Railroad in Waterloo, Iowa, only to have her hopes of the mythical promised land shattered when she learned that Jim Crow did not end at the Mason-Dixon line. Dad, too, struggled to find promise in this land. In 1962, at age 17, he signed up for the Army. Like many young men, he joined in hopes of escaping poverty. But he went into the military for another reason as well, a reason common to black men. Dad hoped that if he served his country might finally treat him as an American. So I picked that particular passage because we look at books that are being banned. Here's someone who wrote a book that gets banned in her home state, but she opens her book by talking about she and her family's commitment to the American dream. So it is what it is.
I'm going to be reading from Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's a story about abandonment, about abuse, the whole story. But I'm going to start with the second chapter. And her and her brother, they were very smart, intelligent kids. When Bailey was 6 and I a year younger, we used to rattle off times tables with the speed I was later to see Chinese children in San Francisco employ on their abacuses. Our summer gray pot-bellied stove bloomed rosy red during winter and became a severe disciplinarian threat if we were so foolish as to indulge in making mistakes. Uncle Willie used to sit like a giant black Z. He had been crippled as a child, and hear us testify to the Lafayette County Training School's abilities. His face pulled down on the left side as if a pulley had been attached to his lower teeth, and his left hand was only a mite bigger than Bailey's. But on the second mistake, or on the third hesitation, his big overgrown right hand would catch one of us behind the collar, and in the same moment would thrust the culprit toward the dull red heater, which throbbed like a devil's toothache. We were never burned, although once I might have been when I was so terrified I tried to jump onto the stove to remove the possibility of its remaining a threat. Like most children, I thought I could face the worst danger voluntarily and triumph. I would forever have power over it. But in my case of sacrificial effort, I was thwarted. Uncle Willie held tight to my dress, and I only got close enough to smell the clean, dry scent of hot iron. Mama related many times without end and without any show of emotion how Uncle Willie had been dropped when he was 3 years old by a woman who was minding him. She seemed to hold no rancor against the babysitter, nor for her just God who allowed the accident. She felt it necessary to explain over and over again to those who knew the story by heart that he wasn't born that way. In our society, where two-legged, two-armed, strong black men were able at best to eke out only the necessities of life, Uncle Willie, with his starched shirts, shined shoes, and shelves full of food, was the whipping boy and butt of jokes of the underemployed and underpaid. Fate not only disabled him, but laid a double-tier barrier in his path. He was also proud and sensitive. Therefore, he couldn't pretend that he wasn't crippled, nor could he deceive himself that people were not repelled by his defect. Only once in all the years of trying not to watch him, I saw him pretend to himself and others that he wasn't lame.
This book, Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson, is one that I think if I were still growing up, trying to find my way, trying to make friendships and trying to find my voice maybe in writing or any other task, this is one that I would have under my covers with a flashlight. It's just hard to put down. It shows when she writes, she's really writing about the power of dreams. And so she shares the story of her childhood and the dreams that propelled her into becoming a writer. So how appropriate for her to open the book with a poem by Langston Hughes, Dreams. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. Langston Hughes. So I'm going to start with her first poem because this book is a whole book of poems. Here's her first poem, February 12, 1963. I am born on a Tuesday at University Hospital, Columbus, Ohio, USA, a country caught between black and white. I am born not long from the time or far from the place where my great-great-grandparents worked the deep, rich land, unfree, dawn till dusk, unpaid, drank cool water from scooped-out gourds, looked up and followed the sky's muraled constellation to freedom. I am born as the South explodes, too many people, too many years enslaved, then emancipated, but not free. The people who look like me, they keep fighting and marching and getting killed so that today, February 12, 1963, and every day from this moment on, brown children like me can grow up free, can grow up learning and voting and walking and riding wherever we want. I am born in Ohio, but the stories of South Carolina already run like rivers through my veins.
I am reading from Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. This is a book that really enlightened me. And I'm reading from two different places. One kind of describes caste, and the other I consider a call to action. A caste system is an artificial construction, a fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups on the basis of ancestry and often immutable traits, traits that would be neutral in the abstract but are ascribed life and death meaning in a hierarchy favoring the dominant caste whose forebears designed it. A caste system endures because it is often justified as divine will, originating from sacred text or the presumed laws of nature, reinforced throughout the culture and passed down through the generations. The hierarchy of caste is not about feelings or morality. It is about power, which groups have it and which do not. It is about resources, which caste is seen as worthy of them and which are not, who gets to acquire control of them and who does not. It is about respect, authority, assumptions of competence, who is accorded these and who is not. As a means of assigning value to entire swaths of humankind, caste guides each of us often beyond the reaches of our awareness. It embeds into our bones an unconscious ranking of human characteristics and sets forth the rules, expectations, and stereotypes that we have used to justify brutalities against entire groups within our species. In the American caste system, the signal of rank is what we call race, the division of humans on the basis of their appearance. In America, race is the primary tool and the visible decoy, the front man for caste.
This is a book that I'm reading from that I've found impressively important in my life. I worked in the schools, and I've found it really important to understand all children from where they come. And this has been a very helpful passage for me. The wisdom is not unique to our people, but I think it has special meaning to those of us born out of mass rape, whose ancestors were carried off and divided into policies and stocks. I have raised you to respect every human being as singular, and you must extend that same respect into the past. Slavery is not an indefinable mass of flesh. It is a particular, specific, enslaved woman whose mind is active as your own, whose range of feelings is as vast as your own, who prefers the way the light falls in one particular spot in the woods, who enjoys fishing when the water eddies in a nearby stream, who loves her mother in her own complicated way, thinks her sister talks too loud, has a favorite cousin, a favorite season, who excels at dressmaking and knows inside herself that she is intelligent and capable as anyone. Slavery is this same woman born in the world that loudly proclaims its love of freedom and inscribes this love in its eternal text, a world in which these same professors hold this woman as a slave, hold her mother a slave, her father a slave, her daughter a slave, and when the woman peers back into the generations, all she sees is the enslaved. She can hope for more. She can imagine some future for her grandchildren, but when she dies, the world which is really the only world she has ever known ends. For this woman, enslavement is not a parable, it's a damnation. It is the never-ending night, and the length of that night is most of our history. Never forget that we are enslaved in this country longer than we have been free. Never forget that for 250 years, black people were born into chains, whole generations followed by more generations who knew nothing but chains. You must struggle to truly remember this past in all its nuance, error, and humanity. You must resist the common urge toward the comforting narrative of divine law, toward fairy tales that imply some irrepressible justice. The enslaved were not bricks in your road, and their lives were not chapters in your redemptive history. They were people turned to fuel for the American machine.
My choice for a book today is Invisible Man, certainly one of the classics by Ralph Ellison. So I will share a small passage. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows, it is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. Nor is my invisibility exactly a matter of a biochemical accident to my epidermis. That invisibility to which I refer occurs because of a peculiar disposition, it's a lot to say, of the eyes of those with whom I come in contact. A matter of the construction of their inner eyes, those eyes with which they look through their physical eyes upon reality. I'm not complaining, nor am I protesting either. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often wearing on the nerves. Then too, you're constantly being bumped against by those of poor vision. Or again, you often doubt if you really exist. You wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds, say, a figure in a nightmare which the sleeper tries with all its strength to destroy. It's when you feel like this that out of resentment, you begin to bump people back. And let me confess, you feel that way most of the time. You ache with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world, that you're a part of all the sound and anguish, and you strike out with your fists. You curse and you swear to make them recognize you. And alas, it's seldom successful. One night I accidentally bumped into a man, and perhaps because of the near darkness, he saw me and called me an insulting name. I sprang at him, seized his coat lapels, and demanded that he apologize. He was a tall, blond man, and as my face came close to his, he looked insolently out of his blue eyes and cursed me, his breath hot in my face as he struggled. I pulled his chin down sharp upon the crown of my head, butting him as I had seen the West Indians do, and I felt his flesh tear and the blood gush out, and I yelled, "Apologize, apologize." But he continued to curse and struggle. And I butted him again and again until he went down heavily on his knees, profusely bleeding. But I didn't linger. I ran away into the dark, laughing so hard I fear I might rupture myself. The next day I saw his picture in the Daily News, beneath a caption stating that he had been, quote unquote, mugged. Poor fool, poor blind fool, I thought with sincere compassion, mugged by an invisible man.
I've chose to read from Boys Aren't Blue. I am reading from chapter 7. It's called Nanny, the caregiver, the hustler, my best friend. Elbows off that table when you eat at my house. Why you taking so long to play a damn card? Scared money don't make money. What did I tell you about staying out of grown folks' business? Listen, Matt. If you won't know if you don't like Brussels sprouts until you actually try Brussels sprouts. If you eat them now and you don't like them, you will never have to eat them again, but you will try at least once. Louis Kennedy Evans Elders was her full name. I always thought it was funny that my grandmother had 3 last names. To the world, she was all those people. But to me and the other grandkids, she was simply Nanny. She stood about 5 foot high, a little heavy set, and I've said with brown skin. According to the stories, my grandmother's hair went gray when she was 16 years old, which I always thought was cool. She was the baby of 13 kids, yet stood as the matriarch of our entire family, even though her siblings were still alive and older than her. When she wanted something done, it got done. And if she couldn't get it done, she would assign one of her kids or grandkids to do it. She was always great at delegation. She was and still is the best cook I've ever known. She had the ability to make anything from scratch as long as she knew the ingredients. One of my favorite memories with her was being one of her helpers in the kitchen doing Thanksgiving dinner and noticing how she didn't use a measuring cup to make anything. She was preparing her famous sweet potato pies when I asked her, "Why don't you ever use a measuring cup, Grandma?" Like, how do you know if you are putting too much or too little in the mix? She responded, "If you're using a measuring cup, your food will taste measured." Taste your food while you cooking it. That's where most people make their mistakes. Get all the way done cooking, and the shit be nasty. We both laughed out loud. Being a little different was my norm, but she never once wavered in making sure I was properly accommodated, just like the rest of the grandkids. My Lord, I was weird. I have to laugh while writing this. Whenever us cousins had discussions about their favorite grandchild, because there was one cousin who always got very sensitive about this, the conversation was mostly in jest with her in the room. I think it bothered her that we even thought she was even equal with all of us. After a while, though, she knew we were messing around, but her response to all the battling over her favorite were always ended the same. I love all my grandkids, and I love each of you differently because each of you need things differently. The different things spoke to my soul. It wasn't until I was older that I realized what she meant and how well she spread her love to all of us, even when there were times she probably wasn't taking care of herself. To be honest, her whole life has been dedicated to spreading herself so thin that there was rarely much left for herself when she went to bed every night. If we knew then what we know now, we wouldn't have let her pour so much energy into us without pouring some back into her in return.
So I will be reading Soul Way, which is a children's book about a little girl who comes to embrace her dark skin. Right. Yeah. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Solway was born the color of midnight. She looked nothing like her family, not even a little, not even at all. Mama was the color of dawn, Baba was the color of dusk, and Mike, her sister, was the color of high noon. Hardly anyone at school looked like Solway either. People gave her sister Mike pet names like Sunshine and Ray and Beauty. People gave Solway names like Blackie and Darky and Night. Solway felt hurt every time, so she hid while her sister made lots of friends. Solway dreamed of being the same color as her sister. She wanted real friends too. So she got the biggest eraser she could find and tried to rub off a layer or two of her darkness. That hurt. She crept into Mama's room and helped herself to her makeup. Oh no, she would hear about this from Mama. Solway decided to work from the inside out and ate only the lightest, brightest foods. With the stomach ache, she went to bed early and turned to God for a miracle. Dear Lord, why do I look like midnight when my mother looks like dawn? Please make me as fair as my parents I'm from. I want to be beautiful, not just to pretend. I want to have a daylight. I want to have friends. If you hear me, my Lord, and would like to comply, may I wake up as bright as the sun in the sky. Amen. When Mama came in to wake her for school the next morning, Solway rose to find not a trace of daylight in her midnight skin. Solway told Mama everything. Mama asked, "What's your name?" "Solway," she muttered. "And what does it mean?" "Star," Solway whispered. Brightness is not in your skin, my love. Brightness is just who you are. As for your beauty, Mama said, rubbing Solway's stomach the way she always did to comfort her, you are beautiful. Solway sighed. Well, you are beautiful to me, but you can't rely on what you look like to make you feel beautiful, my sweet. Real beautiful comes from your mind and your heart. It begins with how you see yourself, not how others see you. Now, up you get and out you go. How could she, as dark as she was, have brightness in her? How could she have beauty when no one but her mother seemed to see it? How could she be a star? That night, a shooting star appeared at Solway's window. "The night sent me," the star said. "Come with me." Solway hopped onto the star, and off they went. Long ago, at the beginning of time, said the star, there was night and day, and they were sisters. They loved each other very much, but people didn't treat the sisters the same. People gave Day pet names like Lovely and Nice and Pretty. People gave Night names like Scary and Bad and Ugly. She felt hurt every time. Well, Night got fed up and walked right off of the earth. Day stayed behind and enjoyed making everybody happy in the sun. But then Day grew too long. Day began to really miss her sister. So did everybody else. There had to be a way to get her back. Day set off to find Night, and she did. I miss you, Day. I miss you too, said Night, but you don't know what it's like to be treated badly for being dark. You're right, I don't, Day replied. But what I do know is that we need you just the way you are. Come and see. From that moment on, and promised to celebrate the brightness in each other, and whether people chose to see it or not. You see, the star explained, we need them both, on their sunniest day and the darkest night, and every shade in between. Together, they make the world we know, light and dark, strong and beautiful. Solway rose the next morning beaming. There would be no hiding anymore. She belonged out in the world, dark and beautiful, bright and strong. And if she ever needed a reminder of her brightness, she could look up at the sky on the darkest night to see for herself. Solway felt beautiful inside and out.
So I'm going to be reading The Hill We Climb, the inaugural poem by Amanda Gorman. Mr. President and Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President and Mr. Imhoff, Americans and the world, when day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast, we've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country in a time where a skinny black girl, descended from slaves and raised by a single mother, can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but this doesn't mean we're striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of a man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so that we can reach our arms out to one another. We seem harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it. Because being American is more than the pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy, and the effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of redemption. We feared it as inception. We did not feel prepared to be heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how would we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but to move what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from our bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, and every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and dutiful, will emerge battered but beautiful. When days come, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
But go tell it on the mountain. I'm going to read just a little section that I think is quite profound, pretty much in the way it was written and what he says in it, or starts with. Then there began to flood John's soul the waters of despair. Love is as strong as death, as deep as the grave. But love, which had perhaps, like a benevolent monarch, swelled the population of his neighboring kingdom. Death had not himself descended. They owed him no allegiance here. Here there was no speech or language, and there was no love. No one to say, "You are beautiful, John." No one to forgive him, no matter what his sin. No one to heal him or lift him up. No one. Father and mother looked backwards. Roy was bloody. Elijah was not there. Then the darkness began to murmur, a terrible sound, and John's ears trembled. In this murmur that filled the grave like 1,000 wings beating on the air, he recognized the sound that he had always heard. He began, for terror, to weep and moan. And this sound was swallowed up and yet was magnified by the echoes that filled the darkness. This sound had filled John's life. So it now seemed, from the moment he had first drawn breath. He had heard it everywhere in prayer and in daily speech and wherever the saints were gathered and in the unbelieving streets. It was in his father's anger and in his mother's calm insistence and in the vehement mockery of his aunt. It had rung so oddly in Roy's voice this afternoon, and when Alicia played the piano, it was there. It was in the beat of the jangle of Sister McCandless's tambourine. It was in the very cadence of her testimony, and invested that testimony with a matchless, unimpeachable authority. Yes, he had heard it all of his life. And now in his moaning, and so far from any help, he heard himself. It rose from his bleeding, his cracked open heart. It was the sound of rage and weeping which filled the grave, rage and weeping from time set free, but bound now in eternity, rage that had no language, weeping with no voice, which yet spoke now to John's startled soul of boundless melancholy, of the bitterest patience, and the longest night of the deepest water, the strongest chains, the most cruel lash, of humanity most wretched, the dungeon most absolute, of love's bed defiled, and birth dishonored, and most bloody, unspeakable, sudden death. Yet the darkness hummed with murder, the body in the water, the body in the fire, the body on the tree. John looked down the line of these armies of darkness, army upon army, and his soul whispered, "Who are these? Who are they?" and wondered, "Where shall I go?" There was no answer. There was no help or healing in the grave. No answer in the darkness, no speech from all that company. They looked backward, and John looked back, seeing no deliverance.
I'm going to read a little bit from the preface that Ibram Kendi wrote, and as I read it, I thought, this is all of the history of the United States that was left out of my history books. Protesting racial policies can never be a long-term solution to eradicating racial discrimination and thus racist ideas in America. Just as one generation of powerful Americans could decide or be pressured by protest to end racial discrimination, when the conditions and interests change, another generation could once again encourage racial discrimination. And that's why protesting against racist power has been a never-ending affair in America. Protesting against racist power and succeeding, that can never be mistaken for seizing power. Any effective solution to eradicating American racism must involve Americans committed to anti-racist policies, seizing and maintaining power over institutions, neighborhoods, counties, states, the nation, and the world. It makes no sense to sit back and put the future in the hands of people committed to racist policies, or to people who regularly sail with the wind of self-interest toward racism today and anti-racism tomorrow. An anti-racist America can only be guaranteed if principled anti-racists are in power, and then anti-racist policies can become the law of the land, and then anti-racist ideas become the common sense of the people, and then the anti-racist common sense of the people holds those anti-racist leaders and policies accountable. And that day will surely come. No power stays forever. There will come a time when Americans will realize that the only thing wrong with black people is that they think there's something wrong with black people. There will come a time when racist ideas will no longer obstruct us from seeing the complete and utter abnormality of racial disparities. There will come a time when we will love humanity, when we will gain the courage to fight for an equitable society for our beloved humanity, knowing intelligently that when we fight for humanity, we fight for ourselves. There will come a time, maybe, just maybe, that time is now.
I'm going to read from Octavia Butler. I'm starting in the middle where the main character is doing a time travel back into her ancestries. I knelt down beside Rufus and rolled him over onto his back. His nose was bleeding. His split lip was bleeding. I thought he was probably lost a few teeth, but I didn't look closely enough to be sure. His face was a lumpy mess, and he would be looking out of a couple of black eyes for a while. All in all, though, he probably looked worse off than he was. No doubt he had some bruises that I couldn't see without undressing him, but I didn't think he was badly hurt. He would be in some pain when he came to, but he had earned it. I sat on my knees watching him, first wishing he would hurry and regain consciousness, then wanting him to stay unconscious so that Alice and her husband could get a good start. I looked at the stream, thinking that a little cold water might bring him around faster, but I stayed where I was. Isaac's life was at stake. If Rufus was vindictive enough, he would surely have the man killed. A slave had no rights and certainly no excuse for striking a white man. If it was possible, Rufus was in any way still the boy I had known. I would try to keep him from going after Isaac at all. I looked about 18 or 19. He looked about 18 or 19 now. I would be able to bluff and bully him a little. He shouldn't take long to realize that he and I needed each other. We should be taking turns helping each other now. Neither of us would want the other to hesitate. We would have to learn to cooperate with each other, to make compromises. "Who's there?" said Rufus suddenly. His voice was weak, barely audible. "It's Dana, Ruth." "Dana?" He opened his swollen eyes a little wider. "You came back?" "You keep trying to get yourself killed. I keep coming back." "Where did she go?" "I don't know, Ruth." He tried to sit down, managed to raise himself about 6 inches before he fell back groaning. "Where's Isaac?" he muttered. "That's the son of a bitch I want to catch up with." "Rest a while," I said. "Get your strength back. You couldn't catch him now if he was standing next to you." He moaned and felt his side gently. "He's going to pay." I got up and walked toward the stream. "Where are you going?" he called. I didn't answer. "Damn, come back here, Dana." I could hear his increasing desperation. He was hurt and alone except for me. He couldn't even get up, and I seemed to be abandoning him. "I want you to tell me about the man who attacked you." "What man? Isaac?" "The men you were drinking with." "They were strangers, white men. They got you drinking, then tried to rob you." Kevin's old story was coming in handy. "What in hell are you talking about? You know Isaac Jackson did this to me." The words came out in a harsh whisper. "All right, Isaac. Beat you up, I agree. Why?" He glared at me without answering. "You raped a woman or tried to, and her husband beat you up," I said. "You're lucky he didn't kill you. He would have if Alice and I hadn't talked him out of it."
All right, I will be reading from Beloved by Toni Morrison. A few days after my last day at work, sitting in front of my house on the pier jutting out onto the Hudson River, I began to feel an edginess instead of the calm I had expected. I ran through my index of problem areas and found nothing new or pressing. I couldn't fathom what was so unexpectedly troubling on a day that perfect, watching a river that serene. I had no agenda and couldn't hear the telephone if it rang. I heard my heart, though, stomping away in my chest like a colt. I went back to the house to examine this apprehension, even panic. I knew what fear felt like. This was different. Then it slapped me. I was happy, free in a way that I had never been, ever. It was the oddest sensation. Not ecstasy, not satisfaction, not a sure fit of pleasure or accomplishment. It was pure delight, a rogue anticipation with certainty. Enter Beloved. I think now it was the shock of liberation that drew my thoughts to what free could possibly mean to women. In the 80s, the debate was still roiling. Equal pay, equal treatment, access to professions, schools, and choice without stigma, to marry or not, to have children or not. Inevitably, these things led me to the different history of Black women in this country, a history in which marriage was discouraged, impossible, or illegal, in which birthing children was required, but having them, being responsible for them, being, in other words, their parent, was as out of the question as freedom. Assertions of parenthood under conditions peculiar to the logic of institutional enslavement were criminal. The idea was riveting, but the canvas overwhelmed me. Summoning characters who could manifest the intellect and the ferocity such logic would provoke proved beyond my imagination until I remembered one of the books I had published back when I had a job. A newspaper clipping in the Black Book summarized the story of Margaret Garner, a young mother who, having escaped slavery, was arrested for killing one of her children and trying to kill others rather than let them be returned to the owner's plantation. She became a cause célèbre in the fight against the fugitive slave laws, which mandated the return of escapees to their owners. Her sanity and lack of repentance caught the attention of abolitionists as well as newspapers. She was certainly single-minded, and judging by her comments, she had the intellect, the ferocity, and the willingness to risk everything for what was to her the necessity of freedom. The historical Margaret Garner is fascinating, but to a novelist, confining. Too little imaginative space there for my purposes. So I would invent her thoughts, plumb them for a subtext that was historically true in essence, but not strictly factual in order to relate her history to contemporary issues about freedom, responsibility, and a woman's place. The heroine would represent the unapologetic acceptance of shame and terror, assume the consequences of choosing infanticide, claim her own freedom. The terrain, slavery, was formidable and pathless. To invite readers, and myself, into the repellent landscape, hidden but not completely, deliberately buried but not forgotten, was to pitch a tent in a cemetery inhabited by highly vocal ghosts.
This book, Things Fall Apart, is written by Chinua Achebe. There's going to be a conversation between two of the characters in this reading. Umuofia had indeed changed during the 7 years Okonfu had been in exile. The church had come and led many astray. Not only the lowborn and the outcast, but sometimes a worthy man had joined it. Such a man was Ogufi Ogana, who had taken 2 titles and who, like a madman, had cut the anklet of his title and cast it away to join the Christians. The white missionaries were very proud of him, and he was one of the first men in Umuofia to receive the sacraments of the Holy Communion, or the Holy Feast, as it was called in the Igbo. Ogunfu Ogana had thought of the feast in terms of eating and drinking, only more holy than the village variety. He had therefore put his drinking horn in his goatskin bag. But apart from the church, the white men had also brought a government. They had built a court where the district commissioner judged cases in ignorance. He had court messengers who brought men to him for trial. Many of these messengers came from Umuro, on the bank of the great river, where the white men first came many years before, and where they had built the center of their religion and trade and government. These court messengers were greatly hated in Umuofia because they were foreigners and also ignorant and high-handed. They were called Katma, and because of their ash-color shorts, they earned the additional name of ashy buttocks. They guarded the prisons, which was full of men who had offended against the white man's laws. The white man is very clever. He came quietly and peacefully with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. The title, Things Fall Apart.
Delta Sigma Theta Sorority has an annual event called Wear Red and Read. And this year we decided that we would focus on banned black books, just to put an edge on and bring attention to the fact that, you know, a lot of these books are classics. A lot of these books have important information and messages and stories. And, you know, it's important to tell the truth, to make sure that we get the truth about the black experience in America and around the world into the hands of young people as well as, you know, everyone. So I think that this event, for me, was a significant way to just show how important it is to challenge these kinds of problematic ideas and policies in relation to African American culture. And I'm just very excited about, you know, the turnout and the experience of listening to some of these wonderful excerpts from these books that are classics, are important, are significant, and understanding that black culture matters.
I think it's very significant to really lift up these very classic and important books that unfortunately have been banned from some school systems. I think they're classics. They offer a lot of lessons that are important for every child to understand. And so by reading excerpts today, we're hoping to remind people about the significance and importance of these books and hopefully get more people to read them.
Oh, well, I enjoyed the event to hear different people's take on the issues that we face, and even just to see the different personalities come out as they read and the energy that they used, and just to think about all of the books as they were reading. I was saying to myself, I read this book and I read that book, and what I got out of each book, and to think, why would anybody ban any of that knowledge? But I enjoyed it, had a good time. I'm looking forward to next year. I'm put my red shirt away and save it until this time next year.
Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, during Black History Month annually, has an event called Wear, Read, and Red. Okay, that was pretty good.
That's, you know that's going in the bloopers, right?